Released in 1983, the Jabba the Hutt action playset is one of my all-time favorite toys, and one of the main reasons I decided to focus on collecting Jabba the Hutt-related merchandise.
That's a sorry tale, but this tale will make you sorrier. Guard, get the rope. You always get him in the end, Jabba.
I was 8 years old when Return of the Jedi came out, and I remember being fascinated by Jabba the Hutt. What 8-year-old boy wouldn't love a repulsive alien crime lord? The fact that he was surrounded by every kind of alien imaginable just made him more appealing. Add a gigantic man-eating pet, and I was sold. In making their Jabba the Hutt playset, Kenner managed to retain everything that made Jabba appealing, while at the same time making him more approachable and even a bit cute. I'd like to take this opportunity to look at the toy in detail, including how it was made and the different versions of it that exist. One of the earliest steps in creating the toy was making a conceptual prototype, something that would help them figure out what the toy should look like and what materials they should use. This is one of those prototypes. It is obviously roughly sculpted and is made of vinyl. This piece has a sort of collar on the bottom that would have been removed if they had ever actually used it to assemble a figure. As you can see, it's quite low on detail. It's really just the equivalent of a rough sketch. It's hollow inside, and is also quite light, as they used relatively thin vinyl. This is a prototype for his body. It's also made of thin vinyl and is lacking in detail, although you can make out some of the wrinkles in his skin if you look closely. One interesting thing about this is the suckers on the underside. I've always thought they looked a lot like, well, anuses. Can you imagine if this was what Jabba's underside really looked like?
You always get him in the end, Jabba.
If you put the two pieces together, you can get some idea of what the completed figure might have looked like, but again, I don't think they were ever seriously going to use this sculpt for the final toy. They did, however, make a couple of fully painted and assembled prototypes using this sculpt. I love how they have Leia from A New Hope standing in for Slave Leia here. At first glance, this looks a lot like what we saw on the front of the retail box, but everything is actually completely different, including Jabba, the throne, and even Salacious Crumb. In the end, instead of using soft rubber or vinyl for the entire figure, they went with a sort of hybrid approach, using hard plastic for his tail and body and a more rubbery material for his arms and head. This is one of the molds used to create the head of the vintage Jabba figure. It's a rotocast mold, and with this kind of mold you can still see a lot of the detail from the inside of the mold on its outside, making it look almost like a metal statue. Liquid plastic would have been poured into the mold, and then the mold would have been spun around, making for a hollow, seamless, finished product. Inside you can see pegs to make holes for the plastic eyes that were inserted into the head later. It's quite heavy. This is what is called a first shot, one of the first parts to come out of the mold. Of course it has no paint on it, the eyes have not been inserted, and the holes for the arm pegs have also not been added. Here's the box for the finished playset. Jabba has Luke chained to his throne, presumably because they never made a Slave Leia action figure in the vintage line. Let's look at the side of the box. Jabba the Hutt has movable head and arms. His tail knocks over any action figure. That's a pretty bold claim. I think we're going to have to put this one to the test. Okay, let's see how you handle this one. Here's a figure that I've cut away so you can see the internal mechanism. I'm not a big fan of action features in general, but this one works well, doesn't affect the appearance of the figure, and actually gives it a little personality. Now let's take a closer look at the entire playset. You not only get Jabba himself, but also his throne and hookah pipe, complete with a bowl for his favorite snack, Tatooine patty frogs. And yes, this is a kid's toy that smokes a water pipe filled with God knows what. Here you can see the plastic eyes they've inserted into the head, which are a little creepy. The indentation for his pipe also gives him a bit of an odd look, like he's talking out of the side of his mouth. Here's a fun fact. While George Lucas later changed this for the CGI versions of Jabba, the original puppet only had 3 fingers on each hand and no real thumb. The toy, however, has 3 fingers on its right hand and 4 on its left. You also get Jabba's pet, Salacious Crumb. I've always thought Crumb seemed a bit lacking in detail compared to Jabba, but he's certainly cute. One thing that really made this playset stand out was the throne. It made the whole thing seem a lot more impressive, a real palace environment rather than just some figures. It's worth noting that many collectors continued to use the vintage throne even when new Jabba figures were later released. It wasn't until 2010 that we got a full throne with a Jabba figure again. They took a number of creative liberties with the throne, adding a manacle on a string coming out of one of the gargoyle heads, for example. But the biggest change was making a kind of dungeon inside the throne itself. Clearly this was inspired by the Rancor pit, and in some ways the idea of being trapped under Jabba sounds even worse than being fed to the Rancor. I mean, just look at this stuff. One weakness of the vintage Jabba figure is the arms. Okay, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but they do come off pretty easily if you use the toy for play. If the arm peg is actually broken off, like this one, your only choice will be to glue the arm in place. But if the peg is still there, you can just shove it back on and it'll be good as new. There were several versions of the vintage Jabba the Hutt playset released for different regions. Here is the American box I showed earlier. This is the Canadian box. It has English on the other side and French on this one. It's definitely a bit rarer than the American one. This is the European version, which is rarer still, at least in North America. I believe it's got 5 languages in addition to English: French, Spanish, and Italian on this side, and German and Dutch on the other. The only variant I don't have in my collection is the Meccano version, which was sold in France. It's actually just the American version with a French sticker on it. In many ways, the most interesting variant is the one from Lily Ledy, the company that sold Kenner Star Wars toys in Mexico. If you look closely at the box, it actually uses a different photo than the other versions, and somehow they managed to get it way off center as well. All of the variants have essentially the same contents, except for the Mexican version. There are some minor differences with the throne, but the figure itself is actually noticeably different as well. They used a much softer, rubbery plastic for the head that looks different, and is very easy to deform compared to the harder material used in the American version. The color of the arms is also a bit different. This is the American Jabba. You can see how much harder his head is. As the Mexican version is the only true variant of the vintage Jabba figure itself, it's worth quite a bit more than the regular version. Come and play with us, forever and ever and ever. There's one final variant, and that is a line art box released in the US. There's literally nothing on the box except for this simple line art on the front and back. For a long time, people have referred to this as the Sears version, but I'm not convinced it was actually sold by Sears. While it's true that Sears had a number of exclusive Star Wars toys, pictures have been found of packages sent directly from the Sears catalog, and they just contain the normal full-color box. I believe this box was actually created toward the end of the toy's life, when Kenner wanted a cheap way to get rid of their unsold parts. Although this set sold pretty well, by all accounts Kenner had a lot of its component parts left over. You can still get bagged hookah pipes and salacious crumbs on eBay any day of the week. This seller's trying to sell them in lots of 200. The prices are ridiculous, and even I have no use for 200 salacious crumbs or hookah pipes, but the point is that there are a huge number of these things still around. I picked up this pile of crumbs for very little on eBay. What about Jabba? Novelty store Archie McPhee claims to have bought a huge number of whole Jabba figures and Jabba heads in the early 90s. While the whole Jabba figures sold quickly, nobody wanted the heads, and finally they tried repackaging them with plastic orange wedges or strawberries for Jabba jam. I'm not sure I believe them, but it makes a good story and actually sounds kind of plausible. I myself have a bulk case of Jabba the Hutt figures, and it's not the only one I've seen. Why do I need so many Jabba the Hutt figures, you ask? You sound like my wife. Well, for one thing, it lets you do things like this. So many Jabbas. You know, I find it oddly hypnotic. Oh, sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah. The fact that there are so many of these parts still available today means that they just made way too many of them, and that's one reason why the playset isn't more valuable on the secondary market. This excess in supply and the figure's large size are probably the reasons why there haven't been very many bootlegs of the figure made. These are examples of Mexican bootlegs of Kenner Star Wars figures. They're poorly cast and painted, making them rather terrifying in some cases, but that's kind of their appeal. They made quite a lot of this kind of figure, but never made a real Jabba bootleg of the same type. They did, however, make a little Jabba like this one. This is not the actual bootleg Jabba. That one is quite rare and valuable, but this is a replica of it. I believe the original was painted, but this one is cast in red plastic and is available in many different colors. Look how cute he is. This is also not a genuine vintage bootleg, but rather something that people in Mexico made recently to target collectors in the US. But I find it really rather fascinating. It's made of a squishy rubber with air inside of it, instead of being a block of solid silicone like some bootlegs I've seen. I've also seen this one in several other colors like green and red. It's slightly bigger than the actual vintage Jabba. This one is also from Mexico, which seems to be a real hotbed of bootleg Jabba figures. It's made of metal and resin, and is basically an exact copy of the vintage Jabba playset, but in miniature. This isn't really a bootleg, it's actually a bar of soap cast from the vintage Jabba figure. I got it from an Etsy seller in Poland, and it's cherry-scented. He looks rather embarrassed for some reason, but I can't really say that I blame him. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, I appreciate it. And if you'd like to see more like it, please consider subscribing. I plan to be making more Star Wars related videos in the future. And if you'd like to see more of my Jabba the Hutt collection, feel free to stop by mightyjabba.com. I have nearly every commercial product featuring Jabba the Hutt ever made. Did you have the Jabba the Hutt action playset as a kid? Do you have any memories about it? Feel free to sound off in the comments if you do. And again, thanks for watching.